Ave omnibus, quibus spectacula metatron sequentur, ego metatron sum. Legio est maxima unitas copiarum terrestrium Romanarum. Legiones florem militum imperi Romani formabant. Arma legionari erant, gladius, duo pila, scutum, Lorica et Galea. Lorica hamata, vel squamata, vel segmentata. De Lorica segmentata, qua Romani milites sutebantur, cum vobis loqui volo, ea pulcherrima est. So, moving to English now. The Lorica Segmentata. This is probably my favorite armor as far as Roman armors are concerned. But there are quite a few things we can say about this, and I'd like to proceed with a certain order. Well, the first thing that I would like to talk about is the name. Then we will move to a very specific debate that there is out there between the historians as far as when were used, who used them, and also not obviously the Romans, but what units used the segmentatas, and also whether they were made of metal or leather. We will then talk about the archaeological discoveries, the iconography, and also all the different types that you had as far as Lorica Segmentata is concerned. And then we will finish up with some wearing time, as you know, and my personal impressions. Okay, so let's start with the first point. So the name, Lorica Segmentata. Well, first of all, the word Lorica. Now, Lorica is a Latin word which was mainly used to mean the word armor. Okay, it's a very generic term. So all kinds of armor could be considered Lorica. However, it was not always like that. In ancient Rome, the term was normally linked to leather. Okay, so it was used for those pieces of armor, or sometimes even clothing, that were made of leather. But this slowly changed and started to be used also for armor and gear parts which were actually made of iron. So sometimes we find it with the word iron added to it. So Lorica made of iron, and some other times you just hear Lorica referring also to armors that were made of metal. So the meaning of the word changed. Okay, so initially it was just leather things, leather clothing and armors, and then it changed to kind of all kind of armor. So a Roman would refer to his armor as Lorica. Now, often we find, and you probably know this one, that next to Lorica we have another word attached. Okay, so that is used to specify what kind of Lorica it was and what it was used. Okay, and what it was made of, also in the shape as well. So we have, for example, Lorica hamata, which is the male armor. Okay, we have Lorica squamata, which is the scale armor, and then we have Lorica segmentata. However, so the reason for that name obviously is that it's made of segments. Okay, it's segmented. We have strips. Now, that word, though, differently from the other two, so squamata and hamata, was not used by the Romans. Okay, the word segmentata, the Romans never referred to this as Lorica segmentata. The Romans, so who invented this word? This word was invented in the 16th century by Renaissance historians, as with many other words that we use today when we refer to ancient things. So personally, I use the word Lorica segmentata because that's the one that people will mostly understand when I talk about this, but we don't really know how the Romans used to call it. There are some theories about it. One that I consider rather probably true is the word laminata. So laminata means basically made of plates. Okay, lamine, so that means kind of plates or strips made of this material. So probably, I think that was the term that they used. We're not 100% sure, historians are not 100% sure, but that's highly probable. Also because we have found discoveries and writings when they refer to these as lamine. So most likely the whole thing would have been laminata. We don't know for certain, but that's probably a more historically accurate word for this. Now, that's as far as the name is concerned. So let's move to the second point. The second point is a debate on its usage and what it was made of. When I say its usage, I mean that mostly it's a very popular armor when we think about the legionnaires, okay, the legions, the milites, okay. Now, true, they probably used it, but we need to consider that it was used over a specific amount of time, probably from 1 BC to 300, so probably the end of the 3rd century, Anno Domini. Some people even say that it was possible that they used it up to 315. The reason for that date is the Ark of Constantine, or Constantine, which was erected by Constantine I, and in which we do find images and iconography representing the Roman soldiers wearing segmentata. Some people argue that it might be, we can't really trust iconography that much, but considering that the only two things that we can trust are actually iconography and archaeology, and unfortunately archaeology doesn't always provide that many information on the things that we find, I'd say that that's rather a significant point. So I think that it was used from 1 before Christ, roughly speaking, so around the era of Christ, until the 315 could be a good idea to, that this armor was still in mind. Now, who used it? So the idea is that if we see another archaeological discovery, or another piece of iconography that can help us understand this riddle of time, is the idea of, is thinking of the Trajans Column, okay, in Rome, in Italy. Now the Trajans Column was made after the Romans managed to conquer Dacia or Dacia, which is basically the modern Romania and Moldova kind of area. Okay, it was rather bigger than that, but yeah, that was the idea. He actually managed to reached also up to Hungary a little bit, but that's just to give you an idea of the area. When the Romans conquered that area and made it into a Roman province, they built the Trajans Column. In this column we find a lot of iconography, and there we have two interesting distinctions. The legions and the legionnaires were all wearing segmentata, okay, and the auxiliary troops were wearing either lorica hamata or squamata, so male armor or scale armor. Probably it wasn't that distinct, okay, so probably there were legionnaires wearing hamata. It was probably depended on a lot of things, what kind of battle you were going to fight and who you were going to fight, I imagine. But that that kind of iconography gives us an idea that Roman legionnaires used this one. Now there are a lot of arguments against this point. The arguments are based on a couple of things. The first thing is a stylistic argument. The fact that for some people, not to me, but for some people, the way they are portrait kind of looks as if the Lorica Segmentata looks like something made of an organic material, so either linen or leather, because it kind of is very tight, okay, attached to the body. But personally I don't really think that's the case, because in most of the cases, so that brings us to the point of the debate whether these were made of leather or metal. Now personally I think they were made of metal for some reasons. One thing, again, iconography, as we said, is not 100% sure, so probably it's just the way they drew it, okay? Also because I don't think there is much point on making a Lorica Segmentata of leather, Why? Because look at what it is. Look at Lorica Segmentata for a moment. Lorica Segmentata, what is Lorica Segmentata? Lorica Segmentata is a series of strips, or if you want to be more specific, girth hoops, okay, which are kind of fashioned in circular bands all around the body, okay, because actually Lorica means, more specifically, means body armor. So it's all around the body of the wearer. It's divided in two halves, as you can see, and then you have the shoulder part, okay, to reinforce that. Now, the reason why it was made of bands, okay, or segmented strips, is really simple. That it can be moved easily. You see, it can slide easily because they are overlapping. Now, why is it good that they slide like that? Is that it gives you more mobility. If you need to sit, you can do that. If you need to bend, you can do that. And it does not, instead, if you only have one piece of metal, you can't do that. Now, with leather, you don't need this, okay? Leather bends a bit because it's more flexible than metal. And also, and I've tried that, if you try and put leather this way, overlapping, hoping that the pieces will slide, well, I'm sorry, but you will be disappointed because they don't. Leather has a lot more friction than metal, so this doesn't happen with wet leather, not as easily. So it wouldn't really make sense to make a Lorica Segmentata of leather. You might as well just make one piece. So that's just my argument against it, against those who think that these were made of leather. Also, we have archaeological discoveries to back this up, to back this idea up. We have quite a few archaeological discoveries of metal Lorica Segmentata. We have them in, for example, Kalkriese in Germany. We have them in Corbridge and Newstead in England, and in Spain as well, rather recent one. They were all made of metal. Well, we have yet no archaeological discovery of Lorica Segmentata made of leather. But obviously leather deteriorates a lot easier, very, very easily, so it's difficult to find things. But at least a full strip or something, a buckle, something that could, or whatever, a piece of shoulder. They did find a strip. So probably people who believe in this idea of Lorica Segmentata being made of leather will probably bring this one up. That they did indeed find a piece, but it was very small. And when they tried to to simulate a Lorica Segmentata using that specific strip or band, they noticed that it would have probably been good for an 8-year-old. So no, there is no leather discovery of Lorica Segmentata, and neither is there anything that suggests that these would be made of leather. Instead, we have a lot of metal discoveries. Now, another idea of about who was using these is the fact that in both Corbridge and Newstead, mostly Loricas were found in forts, Roman forts, that were used for cavalry units. And for this, some people brought up the argument that probably these were used for heavy cavalry rather than heavy infantry. To this again, I argue, because the Trajan, again, iconography doesn't support that. We do not have much iconography of soldiers wearing Lorica Segmentata on horseback, and we do have instead a lot of iconography of footmen, legionnaires wearing it. So I think that makes more sense. Also because we need to consider that Lorica Segmentata was quite a good improvement from Lorica Hamata, the male one, because it gives a lot more protection against piercing. Okay, that's the whole idea of Lorica Segmentata. Male armor doesn't really offer much protection against piercing. Okay, so why would you just give this to cavalry and not to the main forces? Okay, and personally, considering that sharp swords and short sharp swords used for piercing, the gladius was very common at the time, and also other kind of swords like that, not only the gladius. So personally, that's what I think. I think it was used by heavy infantry, and but of course not for the whole span of the whole timeline of the Roman Empire. So that's a big misunderstanding that a lot of people have, which actually, so sometimes they depict Roman soldiers wearing this in times that it would just make it anachronistic. They didn't use it the whole time. They actually used Lorica Hamata a lot more, the male Lorica, and they did go back to that one after abandoning these for some reasons we don't know. Alright, let's move to the next point now. There were several types. Mostly 3 types are known. There is an hypothetical 4th type, but we shall not discuss this as there is basically almost no data about this. So let's talk about the main 3 types. Now, these types are the Kaltkrise, which is the German one, which is probably the oldest type. And then the 2 that I would like to focus on, the Corbridge type, which is this one, the one I own, it's a Corbridge type, and the Newstead type. Now, the Corbridge type, as you can see, is made of normally 8 bands, whereas you do find in, for example, or at least for type A, which is mine, because the Corbridge type of Lorica Segmentata is normally 3 different types. Type A, type B, type C. Okay, or B and C put together sometimes because they're very similar. Now let's discuss type A now, then I'll show you some images for type B and C so we can compare the different types. Now as you can see, type A, we have 8 distinct bands. The upper part is attached to the lower part through buckles, as you can see, and strips, leather strips, all right? And that's the same for the front and the back of the armor. The material was pretty much the same for all types. In most of the cases, it was iron in the inside and mild steel on the outside. So that was the main thing. In the case of my personal replica here, it's not mild steel, but it's fully a stainless steel Lorica. But that was my personal choice because I already own quite a few set of armors, and since I do perform quite a bit of maintenance on those to avoid rust, for example, I just wanted to have one that would be almost virtually rust proof. So that's why I chose stainless steel. But and these parts here are made of brass, which is how they were made. Mostly they were the decorations and the rings, for example, and the connections were mostly made of brass or iron. So let's see in detail the differences between the 3 kinds of Corbridge type A, B and C, and then let's compare them to the Newstead model. So again, to mention the Corbridge type A, which I have shown you, it's the actual armor I own. As you can see, this armor was made of 4 basis assemblies, 2 collar shoulders halves and 2 torso girdle halves. Okay, now note that all the components are connected by leather straps and buckles. Now moving to Lorica Segmentata Corbridge type B, you will notice that the shoulder guard components are connected to the torso girdle section by hooks and eyes instead of by straps and buckles, as was the case with Corbridge type A. And this was a later style of the Corbridge type Lorica Segmentata armor and retained most of the wearing comfort of the Corbridge type A. Now, the only difference that you will find between the B and the C type of Lorica Segmentata Corbridge is that in type B, the hooks, okay, that we put instead of the leather strips, the hooks would be made of bronze, whereas in type C, they would be made of iron. Another notable thing is that the girdle plate in the type A, we find 8 bands, okay? In type B and C, we only find 7. So it was simplified in its construction and assembly. Also, the shape of the main shoulder guard plates varied from those of the Corbridge type A. In type B and C style, they had a wider collar plate providing somewhat more coverage and protection for the chest and upper back. Moving to the Newstead model, well, the initial example was recovered from a well in the headquarters building at the Newstead Fort in Scotland in 1905. It was a simpler and easier to produce version. Alright, so having fewer components than the earlier corbridge type. The new Lorica had only 6 girdle plates, so 2 less than the Type A corbridge and 1 less than the Type B and C corbridge types, okay, with the bottom unit being twice the depth of the others. The 6 small independent upper back plates of the corbridge Lorica were replaced by a single shoulder and upper back plate on each side. The right and left halves of the shoulder assemblies were joined using a stronger but less flexible system of loops and pins, as shown in the detailed view on the right side of the diagram above. Alright, so it is now, as you know, wearing time. So, my impression wearing a Lorica Segmentata or Lorica Laminata. It's an armor that is actually quite comfortable to wear. I have to say that the weight is similar to the Lorica Hamata, because we're talking always, well, it's a little lighter than Lorica Hamata, okay? Lorica Hamata is heavier, around 5 or 6 kilos heavier. And this one here, I have to say that particularly with Type A, I only feel a bit of pressure on my shoulders. So probably my shoulders will get tired, I'm not saying quickly, but yeah. But then again, this part here, which is completely, sustained by these buckles and strips, leather strips, I basically don't feel it at all, okay? No weight problems here. My mobility is quite good because these things, as you can see, move. So I could even kick someone, maybe not very high, but again. And yes, I imagine that using a scutum and a gladius would have been very, very effective. So it's a very good armor. I can understand why they implied it, and I personally don't understand why they stopped using it, but yeah, there are some reasons why they stopped using it. One of the main problems with this one is that it's very difficult to repair, meaning that with Lorica Hamata, when you would have one of the rings, some rings would get broken, you can easily replace them. Whereas with Lorica Segmentata, if one of the bands got broken, you needed a blacksmith, okay? You can't do it yourself. And so it was very, very difficult to, as far as maintenance is concerned. And also, you have to consider that they probably needed to polish it quite a bit and consider other things. However, we also need to keep in mind that normally all Roman legions had blacksmiths with them. So probably it wasn't as impossible as we could imagine. But still, it would probably be not very easy to keep, okay? So Hamata was easier to repair in those situations. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please thumb up and subscribe to my channel. Many more videos coming up. Also, if you want, share this video on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, wherever you want. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye. Magnas gratias. Valete.
Ave omnibus, quibus spectacula Metatron sequentur, ego Metatron sum. Legio est maxima unitas copiarum terrestrium Romanarum. Legiones florem militum imperi Romani formabant. Arma legionari erant, duo pila, gladius, scutum, Lorica et Galea. De Lorica segmentata, qua Romani milites sutebantur, cum vobis loqui volo, ea pulcherrima est.